Hi, Rachel. Thank you so much for being here with me today. For our viewers, I will say I'm here with Rachel Kaplowitz, and you are the CEO of Honey. Tell us a little bit about yourself and about Honey.
Sure. So I've been the CEO of Honey for a little over 7 years now, which is crazy. It feels like it just started yesterday. But Honey is an internal communication software. So we sell to companies to basically stand up an internal social network for their team. More traditional people call it the intranet, which we certainly are. But I think the thing that people are really craving right now is just what's going on at work, what's going on with my teammates, what's going on with different departments, locations, and everything. So sort of thinking about how people go to things like Twitter to see what's going on with the world, or to Instagram to see what's going on with their friends, people to come to Honey to see what's going on at work.
And having been able to work in Honey, I can say that that's exactly the experience. It felt very familiar to me of being on a popular social networking site with all of those bells and whistles that are familiar and comfortable and enjoyable. So I appreciate that a lot.
Great. I'm glad that came through. That's what we're
Yeah.
hoping for.
What you say is what it is.
Exactly.
So I recently read the internal communications guide that you put out, and there were a lot of really interesting things in there that I thought that we could talk about. And the first being it in the document, and I think from what I know about Honey, it says that you really support high growth companies. And yeah. I thought maybe let's start with that. What does that mean?
Sure. So a little bit about our DNA. We started Honey as a side project many years ago. We used to work at a big digital agency called Huge. And we were just growing like crazy. We had offices all over the world, about 10 different offices, just people onboarding every week, new faces everywhere. But it was really hard to have one single location to see who everyone was, what everyone was doing. So that led to things like, not feeling connected to people who we have a lot of things in common with. And it also led to a lot of, unproductive things happening. People working on the same types of projects in different locations and not realizing that we were spending the same sort of resources, building the same thing in two different places. So that was something that we really, tapped into early on, is that, we're growing like crazy. We have some of the smartest, most creative people here on our team. But there was not a great way to keep everyone connected. So that's always been what's been motivating us since day one, is how can we make sure that we continue to have this competitive advantage of recruiting and growing and building this amazing team. What happens after you recruit? What happens after people buy into the vision at the company? Like, how do we make sure that the ideas and the talent is unlocked and people are sharing that with one another? So that's what inspired us in the beginning. And now we work with a lot of agencies, startups who are just growing like crazy, and really being thoughtful about how to bring in this talent and make sure that they're being nurtured and connected, and leading to more productive and innovative outputs as a result.
I don't even know where to start in terms of what you just talked about, because so much of what you just said, I think is true and has been true of high growth companies. But now in this kind of new world that we live in, it feels like that's like exponential. So everything you said times 10, and for every organization from, startup to enterprise. And I would like to talk a little bit about that in terms of what the role of technology is in helping to create some of that connection and community that felt like just fell out from underneath us. And then employees and leaders alike were starting to say, how do we get that back?
Absolutely. So what I was saying in the beginning, sort of giving the introduction to Honey, where we fall into like the big mess of technology that people use at work, is we're the place where people go to find out what's happening. And the reason why people are coming to Honey instead of a traditional intranet platform, something that just is a static website with some updates from leadership, is because it feels really familiar. And it's a really democratic way to share information. So those analogies I made to, Twitter, to Instagram, it really carries through into Honey. When you log into Honey, you land on a feed that is personalized for you. So if you're sitting on a team of 2,000 people, you're going to be seeing something very different than someone who's sitting in a different location on a different department working on different projects. And that's critical, because if you're just seeing the same things at the very top of the company, things important for everybody, it's not going to resonate in the same way. I need to see what I care about, what matters to me. And of course, that other stuff, if there's a big acquisition happening or a big senior hire being made or open enrollment, things that do affect everyone obviously need a place there. But it's about building these authentic relationships with each other and with the projects and information that's going on around the organization. So I think, when it comes to technology, thinking about what's important, obviously I always, push honey. That's what I'm passionate about. That's what I'm building. But I think it can be distilled down into, it needs to be familiar. Like, people need to log in and know exactly what to do right away. If you are thinking about rolling out software that's going to require a lot of training and onboarding and just understanding a completely new experience, you're going to lose a lot of people right away. So just thinking about those really simple things, what does the UI look like? What are the colors? What are the buttons? Like, is it very clear? Our head of design, Jason, he always thinks about like the Burger King menu. It's very clear when you go to Burger King, like what to order. When you go into technology to find out what's going on at your company, it should be as obvious. If people have to work to figure out what's important, they're not going to spend any time. They're going to go right back to Slack. They're going to chat with their best friend or, their team and say, what's the deal with this again? Where do I find this? And it just creates way more work for everybody. So simplicity is always number one. The familiarity of the UI and just making sure that it's something easy to navigate. And the third thing that I think is really important is that internal communications, while you may have someone leading it for your company, and you are very lucky if you do, a lot of people do not, it's not something that belongs to a person or to a department. This is a strategic thing that needs to live across the entire organization, and it needs to come from all different levels. So it's amazing if you do have your senior leadership team involved. We have a lot of teams who put out messages from the CEO or different heads of departments. Sometimes they're long verbose writing. Sometimes it's hold your iPhone in front of your face and record a quick message, which are really effective and authentic. And that's great. But you should also make sure that you're hearing from people who are interns or directors or managers, new hires, like, this is my first week at the company and this is what I'm experiencing. And people have been there for 10 years saying, I've been here for 10 years and I have a lot of legacy insight of what's going on here. As you're building that community, that's what's really going to help people feel more comfortable, and people are going to see themselves in that communication sort of matrix and understand, like, oh, this is where I belong. I can participate, not only consume, but engage and contribute back.
So I have two things that I wanted to talk to you about. One of them, it ties really nicely to what you're talking about right now, and that's relevance. A lot of the communicators that we work with at Hot Paper Lantern struggle with both the velocity of communications in the current environment and the relevance of that communications. I was wondering if you're seeing something similar or what you're seeing in relation to that.
Yeah, you're always going to have half your team telling you that there's way too much communication and the other half telling you that there's not enough. And they're both probably right. It's really about thinking about the channels that you're using and also the repeat kind of information that you're putting out there. The more of a habit you can get into and building what I like to call just like an editorial calendar around your internal communications, so a tool that's definitely not new, but usually a tool that lives on your marketing team. You think a lot about where you're putting things out into the world. Is it Twitter? Is it LinkedIn? Is it Facebook? Is it a blog post? Is it a podcast? We don't think as much typically, or we haven't had the muscle built yet to think about it internally. But those same things that your marketing team is excelling at, think about bringing them into the conversations you're having either with your HR team or your internal comms team, whoever's owning this, and learning from it that way. So if you can start to expect, like, oh, on Mondays we get the people update, or on Fridays we get the message from the CEO, people start to expect and like build expectation that this information is coming. And then also thinking about the channel. So the way that we've designed Honey is that this is the single source of truth. This is where everything lives. However, we know that people live in their email, they live in Slack, they live all over the place. So we've built out integrations with those platforms so people can opt for notifications in their email, they can opt for them in Slack, and they can also opt for how often they're getting it. So if I just want a weekly wrap up of maybe like competitive intelligence, that's fine. If I'm on, the marketing team and I'm, hyper obsessed with what's going on in the competitive landscape, I can turn that up and say, what, anytime something is posted about this topic, send me an email as soon as it's published, because I don't want to miss out. So people have different levels of what they think is important, and they should be able to have that personal control over how and when they're getting that information. With, of course, the caveat of saying the company will have certain things that are just absolutely, important that it needs to get out. Right now, I think what's really relevant for a lot of teams is the reopening plans. Like, when are we going back to the office? Are we going back to the office? Maybe we're a remote team forever. Those kind of communications, when decisions are made about that, there needs to be a way to publish that and make sure this lands everywhere. We call it an announcement or a broadcast post, but just thinking about like reaching everyone in all the channels, making sure that you're doing a blitz like you would do externally, just internally with your team as well.
Yeah. Great. So my last question for you is around how to keep decisions simple and how to keep the method of communication simple. So as a technology company, what's your advice for organizations as they're trying to weigh and make the right calls about introducing technology that's going to be helpful for employees versus adding too many platforms that might confuse people?
Sure. I think there are two parts. One is like, how do you keep decision-making around communication simple? And then the second piece is like, how do you just make sure you're not adding to the pile? So the first one, I think this is actually a fantastic example of this, what you and your team have built with just, let's get on a Zoom call, record it, not have a green screen, not have anything like, super like polished that we would do for external marketing stuff we're usually working on. I think being authentic, the example I gave earlier of like putting your phone up in front of you and recording a message to your team, have something that is important to say. Don't say things for the sake of saying things. Know what your message is, but then don't think too much about all of the polish that usually goes with this stuff. Get things out there in an authentic way. In terms of rolling it out for your team, definitely you need to do like an audit of technology and what you have. No one is ever shopping for technology. They're shopping for solutions to problems that are on the team. So like, what are you trying to actually fix by rolling something new out? You don't want something just because it's like something new and shiny and like promises to do things. Like, what is it that you actually see as a gap in your communications plan or whatever it is? And how do you think that this tool may fit it? And once you do decide that, what I see teams doing a lot of is just creating just like a communications plan for the team. So I'll say, this is how we use Slack, this is how we use Zoom, this is how we use email, this is how we use Honey. These are the expectations, the kind of information that lives in these places. And though it may feel like overly simple and obvious for you, the person creating it, it becomes really helpful for your team and making sure that things are used in the right places. You're building an archive on your intranet, but you're using Slack for like real-time conversation and like the kind of the silly everyday stuff that you need to stay human at work. So if you can just publish that and make sure everyone is aligned around it, that goes really, really far. And it's a really simple solution to something really complicated, I think.
Rachel, thank you so much for talking to us today. I really appreciate it. It's such a pleasure for me personally to be able to catch up with you too.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you so much.